What began as a peaceful swim quickly turned into a desperate struggle for survival when a woman was swept away by the strong current, finding herself on the verge of drowning. In the vast wilderness, she screamed for help, but could anyone hear her? Or would a bear, against all odds, hear her cries and do the unimaginable? Sarah Matthews, a 32-year-old wildlife photographer from Seattle, always felt at peace when she was surrounded by nature. Armed with a reliable camera and a backpack filled with essentials, she set out on what was meant to be a refreshing solo adventure, a week-long trek through Alaska's Denali National Park. The crisp autumn air filled her lungs as she walked along a familiar path, with the vibrant reds and golds of the fall leaves creating a beautiful scene around her. As the sun began to set, Sarah chose a spot near a gentle flowing stream to set up camp for the night. As she knelt by the water's edge to refill her bottles, she noticed a flat rock just a few feet into the stream. Without thinking much, she decided to step onto it, a choice that would change everything. The rock, covered in a slippery algae, offered no grip. Sarah's eyes widened in shock as her foot slipped, and she suddenly plunged into the freezing water. What seemed like a calm stream quickly revealed its true strength. A powerful current grabbed hold of Sarah, dragging her away from the shore. Panic overwhelmed her as she was pulled under, the weight of her backpack threatening to drag her even deeper. Everything around her became a confusing whirl of bubbles and murky water. Desperately, Sarah kicked her legs, struggling to reach the surface as her lungs ached for air. When Sarah finally caught a breath, the shock of her situation hit her even harder than the freezing water. The shore was already frighteningly far away, and the current showed no signs of slowing down. As the stream carried her deeper into the wilderness, Sarah's mind filled with fear. All her years of outdoor experience suddenly seemed useless against the sheer force of nature. The icy water was draining her strength with every passing second. Sarah seemed to remember her survival training, struggling to stay calm despite the rising panic in her chest. She knew hypothermia was a serious danger, and every moment in the water made her chances of survival slimmer. "Help! Somebody! Please!" Sarah cried out, her voice weak and barely audible above the roar of the water. She knew the odds of anyone hearing her were low, but instinct made her keep shouting. The backpack that had just been so useful had turned into a deadly burden, now soaked and heavy. Sarah could feel it dragging her down, threatening to pull her under the raging water. With fingers trembling and numb from the cold, she desperately tried to unbuckle the straps, struggling to free herself from its grip. As Sarah was swept around a bend, the stream widened, and she spotted a large, partially submerged log up ahead. With a surge of desperate determination, she turned her body and used what little strength she had left to swim towards it. The current pushed against her, but Sarah kept going, her fingers finally brushing against the rough bark of the log. Clinging tightly to this temporary lifeline, Sarah paused to catch her breath and take in her situation. Looking around, Sarah tried to figure out where she was. The landscape was unfamiliar. The current had pulled her far from her campsite. "Think, Sarah, think," she whispered through her chattering teeth, her voice barely rising above the roar of the river. "Signal for help? No supplies. Swim to shore? Too dangerous in the dark." Her only option seemed to be to scream for help and hope someone might hear her. But before she could gather the strength to do so, a sharp sound pierced through her thoughts. Sarah's eyes widened in fear as she realized what it was. Thin cracks were spreading across the surface of the log, the wood groaning under the constant pressure of the current. "No, no, no," Sarah whispered, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The log that had saved her was now turning against her, splintering right before her eyes. Panic, which she had just managed to hold back until now, suddenly overwhelmed her like a tidal wave. With another sickening crack, a large piece of the log broke off and vanished into the rushing water. Sarah's already shaken position shifted violently, almost tossing her back into the icy current. She scrambled to hold on, her numb fingers clawing at the rough bark. "Help!" she screamed into the dimming light, knowing it was pointless, but unable to stop herself. "Somebody! Please! Help!" At that moment, it seemed like her cries were answered. A group of hikers trekking along the riverbank suddenly heard her desperate shouts. Startled, they quickened their pace, their hearts racing with a mix of fear and urgency as they hurried towards the source of the cries. "Please!" Sarah called out again, but it was too late. With one final awful snap, the log gave way, and she was plunged back into the freezing water. She kicked weakly, trying to reach the surface, but her limbs felt heavy as lead. The current seized her, tumbling her over and over as it dragged her further downstream. Just as her vision began to blur, Sarah's head broke the surface of the water. She gasped for air, choking and spluttering as she struggled to stay afloat. Meanwhile, the hikers, now close to the river's edge, spotted her, a lone figure battling against the powerful current. Her arms flailed as she fought to keep her head above the water, her desperate cries barely audible above the roaring waves. Without hesitation, they rushed to the riverbank, their eyes frantically searching for a way to save her. One of the hikers, a former lifeguard, quickly took charge. "We need something to throw out to her, a rope, a branch, anything she can grab onto," he shouted, his voice filled with urgency. The others immediately sprang into action, searching the area for anything that might help. They tore branches from nearby trees, tied them together with belts and shoelaces, and tossed them out towards Sarah. But the fierce current swept them away before she could reach them, leaving Sarah still struggling against the relentless force on the river. "It's no good," the lifeguard shouted in frustration. "The water's too fast, and she's too far out. We need to find another way to reach her." The hikers frantically scanned the riverbank, searching for a safer place to cross or a way to get closer to Sarah. But the terrain was treacherous, with slippery rocks and steep embankments that made it nearly impossible to enter the water without putting themselves in danger. As the hikers stood helplessly on the shore, watching the desperate battle unfolding in the river, one of them suddenly noticed movement in the trees. "Look!" he exclaimed, his voice shaking with a mix of awe and fear. "It's a bear!" The others quickly turned their heads, their eyes widening as they saw the massive brown bear emerging from the forest, its dark eyes locked on the struggling woman in the river. "Oh my God, no!" one of the women gasped, her hands flying to her mouth in horror. "It's going to attack her!" The hikers watched frozen in fear as the bear moved towards the water's edge, its powerful strides cutting through the underbrush with ease. They knew how strong and dangerous these bears could be, and the thought of this creature confronting Sarah, who was already struggling to survive, was almost unbearable. "We have to do something," another hiker shouted, panic clear in his voice. "We can't just let it kill her." But as the bear reached the water's edge and plunged into the river, the hikers found themselves paralyzed, unsure of what to do. They realized they had no way to intervene without putting their own lives at risk, and the thought of trying to fend off a bear filled them with a deep, primal fear. As the massive bear got closer, Sarah's fear soared. All she could think about was the bear's fearsome reputation and the possibility of being torn apart by its powerful jaws. "No, stay back," she screamed, her voice raw and desperate. "Please, don't hurt me." She thrashed wildly in the water, her arms flailing as she tried in vain to swim away from the bear. Her panic made it almost impossible for her to think clearly or move effectively. When the bear finally reached her and grabbed the collar of her jacket with its mouth, she let out a blood-curdling scream. She kicked and clawed at the bear, her nails digging frantically into its muzzle as she had used every last bit of her strength to fight. "Let me go! Leave me alone!" she shouted, her words barely understandable through her desperate sobs. The hikers on the shore watched in horror, fearing they were about to see Sarah badly hurt. Their hearts raced with fear as they saw her struggling to escape the bear's grip. Even when the bear reached the shore and gently sat her down on the ground, Sarah's fear didn't fade. She scrambled backwards, her eyes darting around, unsure if the bear meant her any harm. "Stay away from me," she cried, her voice shaking. "Don't come any closer." But without making a sound, the bear suddenly turned and vanished into the forest. The hikers, shaken but relieved, tended to the still frightened Sarah and marveled at the extraordinary and terrifying rescue they had just witnessed. Who would have imagined such a twist? What would you do if a bear suddenly appeared in a life or death situation? Has nature ever surprised you in an unexpected way? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.